So hi everybody, I am Lisa Lepke and I am part of the ProWritingAid team. Welcome to the fourth day of Romance Writers Week. So when we first decided to do Romance Writers Week back in June or July, the very first author that I reached out to was Tia Williams. I had just finished reading 7 Days in June in my book club and we all loved it. And Tia said yes almost immediately. And I thought, okay, great, we've got something. Let's do this thing. If no one else says yes, we've got Tia and we'll just ask her all of our questions. And so that sort of got the ball rolling. And so Tia started out as a beauty and fashion editor at magazines like Elle, Glamour, Essence, loads of others. And in 2004, her debut novel, The Accidental Diva, hit the shelves to great acclaim. She published a YA series called It Chicks, and then in 2016, her novel, The Perfect Find, won the African American Literary Award for Best Fiction. And it is coming to your Netflix screens shortly. It's just finished filming, Tia has just told me, and it's going to be starring the gorgeous Gabrielle Union in the role of Jenna. So that is really exciting. But her most recent novel has gone a bit stratospheric. It's called 7 Days in June, and it was chosen as the Reese Witherspoon book club pick. And it leapt onto the New York Times bestseller list, and it's witty and it's authentic and it is seriously steamy, and I loved it. So Tia, are you there? Emerge from the ether. There she is. Hi.
I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, it's so great. And thank you for being the first person to say yes and get this whole ball rolling.
Oh my God, any chance I can get to talk romance and writing, I'm here.
Talk shop. We can talk shop for the next hour.
I love it.
So let's go back to the beginning. Like I always love to hear from writers how they all got started. Did you always want to be a writer?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. So I wrote my first book when I was 7, and it was on my mom's steno pad. And it was called Peter and the Bunny. And I even wrote an about the author section in the back. And it was like Tia Williams, 7, It was a very young fiction writer, but yeah, I always knew. And I had these like 2 passions growing up. One was fiction writing and the other was beauty and fashion. And I was obsessed with fashion magazines. And, I was like 10 years old with a Vogue subscription, Elle, all of it. And reading Cosmo at inappropriate ages. And so I was one of those sort of rare people who I didn't go through that, what am I going to do when I grow up kind of a thing. So I knew. So I'm from Virginia. It's like after I graduate from college, I'm moving straight to New York so I can be an editor at a fashion magazine and write books. So that's what I did.
And you just did it? That's what you did?
That's what I did. Yeah, I moved to Brooklyn the summer of '97 and started working at Elle and then Glamour, Teen People.
And did you start right at the bottom? Did you go in
very
at like
bottom?
Yeah,
very, very bottom. Yeah, I was I was like 22 years old, working in the beauty closet. So that's where editors put all of the beauty products that they're writing about, but everything has to be like specifically organized. It's like, a Dewey Decimal System for eyeshadow. Like it's very important. It's very deep. Like when you watch, Devil Wears Prada and all of that, like that's the era I come from.
Or Ugly Betty. I know it from watching Ugly Betty. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did that. And then I worked my way up to writing cover stories and interviewing celebrities about their beauty looks, covering, fashion week. So it was really, really exciting. And then the world changed and print magazines weren't, the thing anymore. Everything went digital. And I was sort of considered a dinosaur because I didn't come up in that world and I didn't know anything about digital. And so I needed to reinvent myself. And so I left the magazine world and I went to, become a copywriter for beauty brands. So now I'm inside of a brand instead of like reporting on the brand. So I'm an editorial director at Estée Lauder Companies.
Okay, interesting. And Tia still has this full-time job. So she is your life must be very full, running a full-time job and now having a best-selling book.
Yeah, full is a word for it. Yeah.
Were you writing creative fiction all the way through? Like even when you were working with this the whole time?
So when I was a baby beauty editor, I was like, oh, when am I going to write my novel? Like I'm in New York now, I'm living a life. I'm, sitting in coffee shops, like watching people, wondering when it's all going to hit me. And then I realized, girl, you haven't lived at all yet. Like what are you going to write about? Like I felt like I hadn't experienced anything. So I was like, okay, let me figure out my life in New York first, and then like the story will find me. And so I went, I found this totally amazing, interesting group of like young Black creatives in Brooklyn and became friends with them and met a lot of people, went to a lot of industry things, dated some charismatic assholes. And then I was like, oh, okay, I think I have some material. And around the same time, my editor threw a bagel at my head at the magazine I worked at. I was like, you know what? I need to take a break.
This isn't the right place for me.
Yeah, this isn't. So I put all of my stuff in storage, quit my fancy magazine job, broke up with the idiot, and moved to Seville in Spain to teach English to kids for 6 months. And while I was there, yeah, a literal bagel, Liza. While I was in Seville, I started writing this story. I'm 24 or 25 at this time, 24. I started rewriting the story of my torrid relationship with this guy. And I made him sound really dashing and sexy. And I rewrote the whole thing so that it ended up in my favor. There was a happy ending. He wasn't as bad as he was in real life.
Yeah.
And I looked up in 3 months and I had a novel. And so when I came back to New York, started working in magazines again, and I sold it. And that was my first book that published, The Accidental Diva. And I've been writing fiction ever since. So I've always had like this dual path career, an editor and a writer.
I mean, I feel like I've read versions of your life in romance books. Like there's so many stories of like girl moving to New York, ready to make it her career, find this love, give it all up to go and do the thing that she loves. Yeah, right. Your next Netflix special might need to be a bit more biographical. Or maybe it is.
It is.
Great. And how did you learn to write? Did you just practice?
This is an odd answer. I always knew how to write. Like when I look at my old stories that I wrote, like in junior high and high school, like I sound just like myself, just not really refined. Writing was everything to me. And it's the only thing that I've ever felt comfortable in. Like just the whole world could be on fire, but I sit down to write and everything falls into place. And I honestly never took writing classes. I studied my favorite writers. I read so much fiction growing up and I was always a little bit cocky about my skills. I was the editor of the newspaper, yearbook. Like I always was writing, always.
And confident. That's not cocky, that's confidence, right?
I was confident. Yeah. And so I felt like if I studied my faves, I could teach myself how to do it. This is going to sound weird, but when I was growing up, to me, I still believe this, like Stephen King, even though he is a genre writer, is probably one of the most important American writers of this past century, just in terms of how he tells a story, how he structures it. And if you haven't read Stephen King on writing, you've got to go get this book, because first of all, I have highlighted the whole thing. I have like Post-its sticking out of it. It's genius. But yeah, I would read Salem's Lot and It and The Stand and
Misery was the one that like blew my mind.
Oh my God. And just the structure of it and how every single character, even one that just walked into a gas station and walked out, you felt everything about them. Like every character was treated like a main character. And so that's something that I've always done, is like treated every character like they just wandered over into this book from the book where they're the star. So
But that's so interesting, because that you can learn so much from someone who writes so completely differently, like totally different genre, totally different pace, totally different characters. But there's still so much of that that's just technical, and it's just like how to tell a great story that's just universal, isn't it?
Absolutely universal. Yeah. And that's, yeah, it's an interesting point. It's like, it doesn't behoove you just to read within the genre you're writing, I think. At least it doesn't help me. In fact, it trips me up. It's important to understand like the beats that you should be hitting in the genre, within the genre that you're writing. But first of all, if I'm reading books that are in the same lane as the one I'm writing, I unintentionally start to steal.
That's exactly what Carolyn Brown said, that she worries when she reads that she'll just accidentally absorb it somehow.
Totally. And it'll like, I've had to go, I was just going back and forth with a friend of mine who's a YA author on Twitter the other day. I was like, when you're writing and you have to stop and Google because you think you're plagiarizing something and you don't know where it came from. It's like, as writers, we all have that ear, and we're very porous and we just absorb things. So I think it's, for me, it's a much easier lift to read books outside of my genre. And then also I'm not comparing myself. I'm just out of the picture altogether.
Yeah, well, then maybe it just allows you to add more elements, because, well, so we talked about this a little bit before we began. I feel like your books are clearly romances, but they travel a slightly different path from the traditional romance. Like, I feel like your characters have a lot of layers. The road isn't as clear as, you know, in some of the ones that you might find in a Harlequin, more traditional book. And is that intentional?
No, it's just what comes out. I was explaining this to my daughter the other day, who is a visual artist. I don't know where she got it from. I can't draw a straight line, but like, she's in art classes right now. She's 12. She's frustrated because, you know, she's being made to learn these basics that she thinks that she already knows. And she's like, I'm a painter. Why am I learning how to sketch, you know, a frying pan? And I was explaining to her that, you know, obviously it's like, you can't learn how to spell a word until you learn the letters. Like, you don't want to skip all of these steps. Wait, where was I going with this? What was the question? What did you ask me? I just lost myself.
I don't know. I just want to hear about your daughter. Go on, carry on.
Yeah. So I was explaining that to her. She was getting so frustrated because she wanted to get to the good part, you know, and I was like, you're going to have to draw a million of these frying pans before you can get to the painting. But now I don't remember why I was.
We were talking about whether or not it was purposeful that you went sort of off the beaten romance track.
Right. No, it's not purposeful, because, oh yeah, now I know why I brought that up. So we were having this whole conversation about what makes great artists, and, you know, and I was like, you know, my daughter, a visual artist, myself, a romance writer, whoever, you know, a thriller writer, whoever else, a Western. We could all look at a car crash and see a different story. You know,
oh, like, yeah, I love that.
I would want to know who's the guy, who's the girl in the car. Like, were they on their way to elope? You know, a thriller would have, you know, written something
the car crash.
Yeah, dark and sinister. You know, my daughter would be looking at the shadows and the highlights, and, you know, doing, you know, something really dimensional. And when I sit down to write something, no matter how hard I want to write a literary fiction, or this time I'm going to write, you know, this way, it just comes out exactly the way it always comes out. Lots of social issues, lots of lusty sex, and a big, you know, sort of high stakes love story. No matter what, that is what that's what thing. I wrote in 10th grade creative writing, and that's what I write today. Like, it just, we're all set up to, you know.
But if that's the thing that comes out of you, then there would be no reason to fight against that, right? If that is the thing that happens, then, you know, figure out how to make that work the best you can. So let's talk about your writing process. So for these books, are you an outliner? Are you a plotter? Or do you just sit down and let it bleh?
No, I'm a plotter, definitely.
Yeah.
I
I don't know how people can just sit down and start writing without knowing where it's going. It really scares me.
Oh my God, I'm sweating just thinking about it. No, I have to, I am an oldest daughter and I need a plan. Like I have very type A energy. I need to sit down and have structure. I don't know what I'm doing otherwise. And, you know, then I would just start panicking.
So what does that plan look like for you?
So first I walk around with the story for like 6 months. So I'm just obsessed with it, thinking about it all the time in the shower, at, you know, CVS, everywhere, getting to know these characters, understanding who they are, how they would behave in different situations. Not so much plot yet, like in my thoughts, it's more just about the characters. And then when I feel like I have the characters in the setting, I sit down and I plot it, and I do like a mushy outline. Like it's not pretty, it wouldn't make sense to anyone else, but I do separate it into chapters, and it'll be like chapter 1, something funny happened, you know, like it's still vague, but it's like, you know, a little flashback about who she used to be. We see her relationship with her daughter. There's a book event she has to go to, and then chapter 2. So it's not like I get really in depth, but I have like a plan for each piece. And then just for me, when I see like the flow of it, I can understand what's missing, what I maybe don't need to have. I see themes start to pop out, and then I
can see that overview picture of, yeah.
And then I make it a little bit more specific, and then I write it.
But do you write it from start to beginning, or do you write it as and when the feeling grabs you?
So when I sit down to like formally write at my laptop, I do it from start to finish. But when I'm on the subway, I'm in New York, I'm in Brooklyn. When I'm on the subway, when I'm, you know, walking around, doing whatever, I'll have, because I've already written my outline and I know what happens when, I'll be like, oh, I feel like writing this dialogue for chapter 8. And I'll just put it in my notes.
So you can just jump it, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't do that when I sit down to like for real write. It has to be in order. So like, so I have it in my notes, and then when I sit down to write for real, I copy and paste the notes into whatever chapter it belonged in.
Okay. There's quite a few people that Andrea says that she feels like you're explaining exactly her process, so she feels a lot better.
Yeah, it's so good to feel seen. Like, oh, you do that too?
You do that too, yeah. I mean, there's some people that say that that's not what they do, and they can't outline, and they feel like it stifles them, and everybody needs to find their process, right?
Totally, yeah. I wish I was a pantser. Like, it just appeals to every like lost generation, like romantic idea of writing, like honestly sitting in a cafe in Paris and just
it just flows.
Right, yeah, it just flows out, you know.
See where it goes. Yeah, I mean, but for some people that works really well. When I sometimes like it is when I can't think of what to write, and so then I'll just sit down and write, and like maybe it'll turn into something, or maybe it won't, and maybe it's just exercise, you know. It's a bit like going for a jog. And so then I can do that if I'm not trying to like put pieces together. If I'm just trying to spark ideas or whatever, then I quite like just sitting down and seeing where it goes. But yeah, for big projects, you know, essays or things at work or anything. It took me until my 4th year of university to realize that I could write an essay in a quarter of the time if I took the time to write an outline in advance.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Nobody told me that.
Right. Well, you have to find your own style.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so how many drafts well, actually, so my question, we've been asking everybody whether or not they love or hate the edit. And it feels like it's about, and this is your edit, your own self-edit. It feels like it's about 50% love, like just powering through a first draft and then going back and tinkering and making it better and adding all the magic there. And some of them hate it. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I have a really unique problem. And my problem is that I'm an editor in real life. So if, not that this isn't, of course, I have two real lives, but like, you know, my day job, I'm writing, but I'm also editing other people's writing. And so it's really hard for me to turn off that editor piece and just be the author. And I don't turn it off. And so the whole time I'm writing, I'm trying to make it as pretty as possible. So this is what I do. And I actually do quite like it because I love editing. You know, it's a big part of my life. I edit other people's books when I read them, which is so unattractive and obnoxious. Like, how dare I? But this is what I do. So I mean, I've been doing this long enough to know that you really shouldn't edit like as you're writing for real, because you're never going to get anywhere. So I just the chapter, and then then I'm done for the day. And then when I come back the next day and sit down to write, I edit that chapter before I go anywhere else.
Oh, that's what a few of the authors have said, like that short editing cycle of like just the next day before you start. And is it good to like sort of jog your memory of exactly where you're at as well, so that you can hit the ground running a bit?
And then also like the next day, I feel like I know better what I was trying to say. Because
all night while you've been in bed, it's probably bubbling away in there, and you can think of better ways to say the same thing that you were saying. Because that's the problem with, well, it's the joy and the problem of the English language, well, in every language, is that there's a thousand ways to say every sentence. You know, every moment, everything could be described in a million different ways. And so it's hard to zero in on that way, which is why a lot of people just tinker and tinker and tinker and tinker forever.
I know. And that's another, I mean, that's a reason why it's so important to find your voice, whatever it is, because once you start to edit, it becomes less about, did I use the wrong word? And more about, does this sound like me? Does this sound like the story? You know, am I showing off right here? You know, like who even is that? Like, did I accidentally sound like Jasmine Guillory? You know, like what? So you should have an ear for how your language flows.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense. So I've got a few questions here that have just come up. Sean wants to know if you had an agent when you sold your book. What came first?
When I sold my first one back in, no, I didn't have an agent. So it was so long ago that this probably doesn't even apply. But so in the summer of '97, after I graduated from University of Virginia, I don't know if this is still offered, but back then NYU had a summer postgraduate publishing course where this can't possibly exist. And this is why. Half of the summer was spent learning about magazine publishing, and the other half was spent learning about book publishing. And real journalists and editors from the industry would come and teach these workshops every day. And by the end of the summer, we all had jobs, which was incredible because you'd been networking all summer. So I obviously went the magazine route, but I still had contacts in book publishing from that course. And an agent came to speak to us one of those days that summer. And so now it's 3 years later, I'm back from Spain and I've written a book, and I was like, oh, I know an agent, Marianne Maples. And I reached out to her and she loved it. And so I was pretty lucky because it's really tough these days.
Yeah, is she still your agent?
No, she's actually the publisher of Rodale now. So she left agenting. So yeah, I have a different agent now who is lovely. And I found her through just, knowing a lot of authors and editors in the city because I've been at this for a while. But when you're coming into it without having contacts and being new, the best thing to do, I'm sure everyone is saying this, but it's true, just find out who agents in your genre, like look at books that you like and who they're thanking in their acknowledgements and reach out to them. Go on their websites, find out exactly what they, in what condition they want a submission, and send it out to as many as you can find.
That's such a smart trick, just going into the acknowledgements, because people will, of the book that is most similar to yours, and figure out who is the agent for the people like that. That's such a quick hack to figure out who you want. Smart. Kathleen wants to know if you had trouble finding someone to publish your books because they're so steamy.
No, it's never been that. What it's been is, do Black women talk like this? Do Black women read books like this? Should we add some sort of racial oppression piece to this to make it more relatable? And it's like, why?
Because if it's going to be an author of color, it needs to have some sort of oppression in it. It needs to,
yeah. So that's been the big thing. My first novel, The Accidental Diva, is about, a 25-year-old Black beauty editor at a big fashion magazine. And editors were like, there are no Black editors at fashion magazines. And I was like, I am a Black editor at a fashion magazine. They're just about
right here.
I'm right here. And even if I wasn't, and even if there really weren't, and even if I sadly was the first Black beauty editor at Glamour, why not write a book where one exists?
Yeah. It's that chicken and egg situation. If nobody sees these characters.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, how important is that to you, that whole representation of you as a person of color? And also I really liked how you wrote about Eva's chronic pain and health issues as well, because I feel like aside from Talia Hibbert, whose book I read recently as well, but before that, there's very few romance protagonists that have, chronic health conditions. I feel like there's more and more protagonists of color, but I think compared to the giant world of romance writing, it's still tiny. So talk about that. What does that mean to you?
Talia and I were just having a conversation about this. I love what she's done. So I have had chronic daily migraines since I was 9 years old, and mine are classified as intractable, which means incurable, which means no one knows why I get them or how to really treat them. And so I wake up in pain every single day of my life, which is devastating. It colors everything, every relationship, your work life, being a mother, just being a person out in the world. It just, pain comes before anything else, when you're a chronic pain sufferer. And I always wanted to write about it, but how? I know there are people that really love it. It's not for me. I don't really like sick fic. I don't want to, it depresses me, it makes me sad. So I wouldn't ever write that. How would I, my books are sexy and fun, and having a invisible illness that no one understands isn't fun. So I had never really figured out how to work that into fiction writing until 7 Days in June. And I was like, just tell the truth. people from all walks of life with all sorts of different issues and disabilities, secret or hidden or otherwise, live very full lives. So we deserve representation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that humanity and that shared, even people that don't have, the same migraines as you, there's a million different other invisible illnesses that, will still feel similar. And that worry, I felt like Eve, her first relationship had ended because, and I think she felt like it was because of this condition. And so would anyone ever love her again? And that's a really heartbreaking and important question, right?
Definitely. It's one I struggled with forever.
Yeah, no, I think the way that you talk about it is, it's not sick fic, like you say. I think that's a really interesting way to put it. So tell me about your characters, because I think there's one of the things that I think is really interesting in writing romances and relationships is that you have to, well, actually, Julie Cohen, who we interviewed, said that the most interesting thing that she finds about writing romance is that on the first page they meet and you know that they're perfect for each other, and then you have to spend an entire book with them apart, and then they only meet at the end. And so, but somehow though that initial relationship needs to be clear. Whereas yours has all of this backstory that feeds into it. I don't want to give away too much of your book, so I'm sort of trying to speak in vague ways.
Yes. So 7 Days in June is about two sort of well-known, two pretty famous authors in totally different genres who randomly meet at a fancy book panel in Brooklyn. And all these sparks fly, but unbeknownst to everyone there, they actually know each other. And 15 years before, they had spent 7 days together, this very like torrid, love-struck romance. And then they never saw each other again. They went their separate ways.
They're only teenagers at this point. So it's like young teenage intensity, like the way that bit is written. I just really felt that like teenage. I've never, you've never felt any of these things before, and it's like
just the hormones, insane. And so they run into each other again after all this time, and no one knows that over the past 15 years they've been writing about each other and to each other through their books. So they've been sort of communicating to each other through their books over the years. And Eva, the female protagonist, is an author that lives in Park Slope, Brooklyn, a very progressive, like she Brooklyn neighborhood with her 12-year-old daughter. She's a single mother, and she writes a series of vampire erotica books called Cursed. And he is a very, acclaimed literary fiction author, National Book Award winning, who lives nowhere. He is a child of the world, and he's not settled down, and he likes to live by the water and doesn't really have a home. So neither one of their lives are set up to complement the other at all. But they meet each other and then have to deal with each other's presence again after 15 years apart.
Yeah, and it's very practical in some ways because, she still has to get home to feed her daughter dinner, and some days she can't go out because she's got a migraine, and they both have issues. So when you're building those characters, how do you give them the issues but also still make them lovable by your readers, so that your readers are on their side all the way through?
I think it's because their issues don't define them. Eva is in pain all the time, but we see very, right away that it's not the only thing there is about her. She's funny, she's witty, she's a great friend, she's a great mom. There's this nagging gargoyle sitting on her head all the time, which we're aware of, but there's also so much else going on. So she's like a fully drawn character. And the same thing with Shane, like, he has all these quirks, and you find out that he's trying to eat healthy and he hates it. And, he mentors all these kids and he loves them. And, that might be, those relationships might be a little too strong for someone just coming out of AA. They always tell you to take your time before you forge really strong connections with people, or, jump into a relationship, because you should be working on yourself and your sobriety. And he totally ignores that in every way. So there's a lot going on with who these two are, so that it isn't like a one-note, one-dimensional kind of a.
Yeah, they're very layered. Like, I feel like there's a lot of dimensions to them. And I think I felt Eve's sort of fear, like that she was playing it safe a little bit in a lot of ways, even though she wanted to, maybe wanted to write a book outside of what she was known for, and wanted to love someone again, but was worried that no one would be able to love her. And are those vulnerabilities that are there? Is that what gets people on side and helps them cheer them on?
I think definitely, like any sort of, even though both Eva and Shane have these very specific, past traumas, and they have very specific toxic coping mechanisms that they have had in the past that they're getting over. I think even if you don't relate to the specificity of their challenges, we all have something. We all have something that that trips us up, or that we're dealing with on a constant basis. And I think, that's why so many villains are relatable, because if you give them a backstory that makes sense, suddenly you're the villain too. Like, if it makes sense to you, then you can, put yourself in that person's shoes and feel it. So I think relatability is so important if you want your characters to be liked. Some characters don't need to be liked. Depending on your story. Not every character has to be like a stuffed animal.
Yeah, well, and in one of the other sessions, they were talking about how it's good to have some characters that help and some characters that hinder. The ones, there's always ones that are there to help, to provide the support, and the ones that are getting in the way, which I thought was interesting, and I hadn't thought of it that way before. Let's talk about sex scenes, because you write a great sex scene, but it is really hard to write a good sex scene. I have read so many awful sex scenes.
It's a fine line.
It is. So what makes a good sex scene?
I think, first of all, a sex scene can't just drop out of the sky and land in your book. Like, it's just like any other scene. It's supposed to be propelling the plot forward. So, I think it's easy to get all caught up in like the logistics of the sex, and, does this sound weird? Is this dumb? Like, it's important to remember that, like, these are still your two characters. So like, it's more about, it's more about figuring out what these two people would do when they're having sex than anything else. And that's what always helps me. It's like, it's a character study. It should hopefully reveal something about them that you couldn't get from another scene. Something should happen there where it's moving the narrative forward. They shouldn't just exist in a vacuum. Like maybe there's something planted in a sex scene that, relates to something else in the book. Maybe an inside joke is shared. Maybe there are giggles. Maybe someone falls out of bed. Like, maybe, like the real stuff, I think, is so much sexier than like a super glossy, perfection sex scene. And I think that's where authors get tripped up because they're trying too hard to be like #sexy.
Perfect. Yeah.
But who knows what that is? Sexy is different for different people. So the best thing to do is to really put yourselves in the minds of the two people having the sex and really just try to animate from that place.
Yeah. Well, and what can you reveal about this character through this sexual encounter that wouldn't be revealed any other way? Like, why does it have to be here and in this scene, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then they end up, I mean, that's always my, point of entry, so to speak. And and then they end up really steamy because like you're so into the characters and like now the characters are doing this stuff and it's like, oh, it's exciting.
Yeah, well, somebody in the chat has just said realistic is steamy. Like if you and real sex is, messy and funny and silly and like it's real. It's never just #sexy.
Right. Like there's a part in one of the sex scenes where it's like the first one and Shane like pulls out a condom and he has this moment of being like really nervous because he hasn't had sex in a long time because his AA person told him that he shouldn't be doing it. So he hasn't done it in like 2 years. He's like, how old is this condom? Will this condom break? What are we going to do? I don't care. Like uses it anyway.
Yeah, and that reveals something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I like it. Okay, let's go back to a couple more questions. So Cynthia wants to know how you balance writing and work and being a parent all at the same time.
Yeah, not well.
And and health issues as well, because I feel like that's probably like the big four, or maybe there's more on top of that. I mean, it's a lot.
No, it is a lot. And I don't know. I don't know, because I can't I can't have like a daily writing practice because I never know how I'm going to feel from day to day. So I can say I'm going to write when Lena goes to bed every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but I might not feel great on Monday and Wednesday and Friday. And chances are I don't, like after a long work day, forget it. So what this for me, like what this turns into, and this, I've only come to this after, being an author for 20 years, I would try to force it and write through the pain and write through whatever else I had going on. And then the writing wasn't good. And then I've let myself down. And then it's like, who wins here? Literally no one. So what I have done that works for me is just, if I can't do it, I'm just not going to do it. And we will all live to see another day. But that means on the day that I feel great, writing is the first priority.
Okay.
Like luckily I have a child who is going on 13 now and I don't have to put her to bed. I don't have to tie her shoes. I don't, like at that age, like, they're not babies anymore and she'll be fine. She will have chicken nuggets like a kindergartner and she will be fine.
She will be fine.
Maybe this means I don't see